Good evening. Good evening. How's everybody doing this evening? Good, good. It's a very comely crowd, I have to say. Good evening, and on behalf of everybody at Penn American Center, welcome to our third annual Prison Writing Benefit Reading. My name is Rakesh Satyal, and I'll be your host of sorts for this evening. For more than 30 years, Penn's prison writing program has been on the front lines of prison reform, helping inmates in federal, state, and local penitentiaries cope with life behind bars, gain skills, and have a voice while they are imprisoned. Our program is essential as the United States has the highest documented incarceration rate in the world, with nearly 2.5 million people incarcerated as of 2007, 70% of whom are non-white. Penn's prison writing program accomplishes its extraordinary work through one-on-one mentorships and an annual writing competition that receives between 20 to 30 entries per day, including from prisoners on death row. The entries come to us, unlike most pieces of correspondence in this technological age, via snail mail. The prison writing program sends each inmate who contacts us a free copy of the very helpful prison writing handbook. This handbook, which you can purchase at one of the tables in the lobby of the venue outside, is a resource for these men and women. Tonight's event will not just showcase and celebrate some of the finest entries that we received for our prison writing competition via Penn's friendly postman, but we also hope to raise a little money in the process. We'll have 6 remarkable readers: Talib Kweli, Junot Diaz, Lisa Dierbeck, Wahida Clark, Sean Dalpiaz, and Wally. They require no introduction, although if you want to clap, please do. But to learn more about them, please check their bios in the program distributed to you as you entered. In the second portion of tonight's program, Jackson Taylor, the head of the prison writing program, will speak with writers Wally and Barbara Parsons on the importance of programs such as the Penn Prison Writing Program. We have a wonderful raffle, and in the break between the reading and the panel, I'll be back to announce the fantastic prizes. All proceeds will go to support this important program, so be prepared for that. Be very prepared for that. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Eisenberg, Executive Director of Penn American Center, who will say a few words about the organization.
Thank you and good evening. Penn rests on the premise that literature, the precious exchange between writers and readers, and freedom of expression are the pillars of our organization and its purposes. And for us, the connecting force is an international fellowship. Penn is comprised of writers and literary professionals and supporters who help other writers who face distress in terms of the dark shadow of censorship, oppression, or jail. Our primary activities are human rights advocacy for those like Liu Xiaobo in China, jailed for 11 years for calling for democracy, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, and public programs such as our recent one in solidarity with Mexican journalists and writers facing terrible conditions in Mexico. In May, that brings writers from around the world together in New York over several days. Our work with students in our Readers and Writers program and our Penn Journal all steer by the same principles of protecting free expression and promoting literature. Founded in 1971, Penn's prison writing program, so ably led by Jackson Taylor and coordinated by Jonathan Dozier-Ezell and Tim Small, with generous help from the New School and their MFA students, as well as interns from colleges, other colleges and universities, maintains a program that receives writing from prisoners and offers them suggestions by a thoughtful reader and through correspondence. Penn's Handbook for Writers in Prison is itself a model of sensible and useful instruction. And just a word that brings all things together in one life on my behalf and my colleagues, and Larry Seams, the director of our Freedom to Write program. Lucy Cavaller, at 87 years old, died on Saturday with over decades of dedication to freedom to write, and was one of the founders of this prison writing program. When the season of submission for Penn's Prison Writing Awards is upon us, I see our tables filled with envelopes, and I'm always moved by this sight. It is a reminder that behind walls and bars, the imagination lives, and that writing represents a way of rehabilitation and a force against resignation and isolation and the possibility of a road back. To all who make this program what it is, to the performers and writers here tonight, to each of you for coming this evening to make your contribution, thank you.
And now, without further ado, I'd like to reintroduce our wonderful readers tonight, Talib Kweli, Junot Diaz, Lisa Dierbeck, Wahida Clark, Sean Dalpiaz, and Wally Lamb.
This is the voice of Robert Garite. I'm reading from his piece, which won the honorable mention essay for this past year. It's called Shimmers of Light. So for a moment, try to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is on their way to prison. Imagine having done something wrong, something you can't even believe you let yourself do, but once you arrive at the county jail and pass through a series of doors that eerily click shut behind you, you realize that life will never be the same. Right then, remorse and shame start to permeate your thoughts. Now, your arrest may have suddenly interrupted years of bad behavior you know you should have stopped long ago, but these thoughts don't change much. You have other problems to deal with now. You soon find yourself surrounded by complete strangers, individuals who are themselves at a very low point in their lives. For the most part, everyone seems completely indifferent to you, except for the fact that you have to share everything together. If you have half a brain, you realize that when someone does approach you and strikes up a conversation, they probably want something. And although it seems like there is always someone around, you've never felt so alone. Quickly, it comes to your attention that there are rules for everything, even when you can talk, when you can eat. Officers have rules, inmates have rules, and somehow you have to find a way to follow them all. But one thing is certain, one way or another, you will comply. Furthermore, concrete, iron, barbed wire blot out the sky, and they serve as constant reminders that there is no way out.
Good evening. This poem that I'm reading is by Frank Jackson III, 1976 poetry winner. It's called Got the Message. In this land of Coca-Cola, the real thing deserving a break today, but not between a sesame seed bun, took stock in America while singing, "We shall overcome," and got a cold slap in the face. And goddamn if I ain't tired of getting chased every day by some 100% all beef patty police. The lame is trying to snuff me with a Hawaiian punch, as Mr. Whipple looks on getting his uncold nuts off while squeezing the toilet paper. Look, the minute that I got militant, I got a threatening letter from the CIA, said in part, "Please don't fiddle with the Oreo middle." Well, just to prove a point, I went to Chase Manhattan looking for a friend and got a violent chemical reaction. Yes, from FBI agents disguised as cookie-cutting L's, and don't think calling a Roto-Rooter man will send my troubles down the drain. Uncle Ben even tried to convert me. He said he built my body in 12 different ways, but I told him I be thinking I'm feeling free, so he tried to get me to join the Pepsi generation. But they ain't really here to stay. Why? The kind of double protection I be needing ain't in no Canada deodorant. I got a surprise when I told him I felt like I was the one, because he wished and said as he tap danced away, "You is right. They got your black cakes frying." And it seemed like every time I get a new lease on life, I get zapped with a raid. But hey now, just like them roaches in my kitchen, I'm getting immune.
John Mack's poem, Grace, winner of the Poetry Award, 1977. And the other God, in the late hours of the night, and dripping with blood and grime, came through side streets, creeping among shadows, along the walls of tall buildings, and with trembling lips and fearful eyes, whispered and bade me, "Search the chamber of my heart for poetry, or seek his grace with the vicious use of my knife."
Hi guys, I'm reading for Zachary Redfern, August 22nd, Friday. I've been stressed out about starting a new job. Scrubbing pots isn't easy work, and I am not a youngster anymore. It's all right though. Everyone helps each other out. They can't leave until we're all done. Another prisoner in this pod is writing trivia questions for a British website. He has friends that he sends them to. That person puts them on the site. There may be monetary compensation involved. He asked me if I wanted to write questions too. I went to the library today for research. I'm lousy at trivia, but writing good questions is a skill. You want to make them interesting and fun. There are so many little ways people can make money out there, but they're often not worth doing. But for someone who makes $10 a month, they're all worthwhile.
So somehow, the days start turning into weeks, court dates come and go, and once you finally get your sentence, you're transported to a real prison. Hopefully, you avoid a maximum security penitentiary, but either way, you won't be fully prepared for what you encounter. During the bus ride, you sense that this will be one of the last times you will be in traffic for a while. And so you start to soak in the sights. You realize that you're taken for granted. Things like trees, grass, regular people. Once you pull into the prison, you know you'll be glad to be rid of the cuffs that have been biting into your wrists for the past few hours. But as the gates shut, you also realize that what's waiting for you probably can't be any better. Life has been irrevocably altered. The people you find yourself around now have been doing time for years, and now people watch to see what you are made of. And there are, of course, more rules to follow. But it seems like the consequences are more serious than ever before. Although at first things are subject to change without notice, maybe you get lucky and find a safe little niche for yourself, somewhere people don't seem to notice you very much. But either way, it doesn't take long for you to figure out that the less you leave your cell, the fewer problems you encounter.
I'm reading for Keanu Cook, Cummins Unit, Grady, Arizona. I've discovered something more cohesive than loyalty, something more vicious than faith, something even more cementing than creed or culture could ever be. Cigarettes. Ever since the ADC has cut out and outlawed smoking, I've seen cigarettes do some amazing things. I've witnessed them bring blacks and whites, Bloods and Crips, vice lords and disciples, Christians and Muslims, Aryan nation and black nationalists together. The same culture or group of people that proclaim their hatred or dislike for another culture or group of people smoke cigarettes with that avowed enemy. Cigarettes are power, real power. A dude with a cigarette can get about any staunch smoker to do anything he wants them to. Cigarettes can get a dude killed. A real shame, sure, but that is the penitentiary. That is the power of nicotine.
Sometimes it may even feel like you've been caught in the midst of a powerful storm. The winds of this storm constantly batter you with the force of uncertainty, of never knowing whom you can trust or what might happen around you next. The thunder that booms resonates with the incessant noise created from too many people crammed together in a space that wasn't designed to hold so many. And its unnatural darkness is thick from a multitude of restrictions that seem to completely obscure the outside world from your view. And when the lightning from the anger that surrounds you flashes, you get the sense that you should probably find something to use for cover. You also notice that there are a lot of people around you who are heavily medicated and probably need to be somewhere else other than in the general population of a prison.
Hello, everybody. I'm reading for Chastity West, third place memoir, 2010 excerpt, Left Behind. Everybody lock up, the guard barked over the intercom. Get in your cells now. Oh, God, what now? One of the girls asked. There's a code purple, someone announced. Somebody hung up in Building 2. Building 2 hosts the youth for offenders and a mental health program. This wasn't good. Either a child or someone emotionally fragile had attempted suicide. My roommate was out of the unit, so I stood alone in the dark cell. A code purple? Whoever she was, whatever her story, I knew that it wouldn't end well. The cell door opened with a click, and my roommate came puffing into the room. Her hand groped for the light switch and flicked it on. Did you hear? Mimi asked. There was a code purple in Building 2. They said it was Rosa. Rosa Munoz? Really? That doesn't sound like something she'd do. My roommate shrugged her shoulders and plopped down onto her cluttered bed. Everybody has a breaking point, she said. Staff kept fucking with her when she went off on that red-headed rookie who was messing around with Cammie Kanutsky. Once she let it rip, the staff targeted her, kept harassing her, ticketing her. When she came out the hole, she just wasn't the same. I hadn't seen Rosa in weeks, but I was all too familiar with the classic DOC technique. Punish and silence the inmate who knows too much and dares to make a public accusation. And the most effective way to break her spirit is to throw her into solitary confinement. Put her on investigation. Teach her a lesson and let it serve as a warning to anyone else stupid enough to think that they have a voice. Rumors quickly circulated throughout the prison. She's a vegetable, a girl seated beside me in the cafeteria stated. No, her lunch partner corrected. I heard that she woke up and took a breath on her own. As soon as the swelling goes down in her brain, they're going to ship her back here. She coded in the hospital, a passerby chimed in. No, that's not true, a blonde-haired girl with a mouthful of sandwich yelled after her. She's in stable condition. Nuh-uh, critical. No, she's being discharged by the end of the week. How can that be? A thin voice cut in. I heard she's dead. Gabrielle, one of the facility's social workers, came by a few days after Rosa's suicide attempt. I knew that it couldn't be good. Anytime Gabby showed up to the Lifers building, we knew to expect bad news. Whatever you believe in, Gabby said, as she took a seat at one of our tables, Now may be a good time to offer some good thoughts for Rosa. It doesn't look very good for her right now. When Gabby left, I stood with my back facing the door and felt the inside of my nose stinging. I imagined Rosa's small body draped in a pale blue Johnny, lying still in a white hospital bed, her ankles shackled to the bed rail, though she posed no threat to anyone. I could hear the rhythmic gush of air made by the respirator, the beep of strange machines. I could see each of the plastic tubes that were connecting her to life. I saw small bruises atop her pale hand and in the crease of her arm, the small strips of medical tape holding needles in place. I wondered if there was some form of consciousness beyond her unconscious body. Would she have frightening, fragmented thoughts or experience a complete and euphoric clarity? What did it feel like to slip into perfect peace, to have a day outside of these walls?
Dana Schultz, Dawson Prize for Poetry, 2010, Feather. A single feather fell from my ceiling. I certainly was not expecting that. Nor was I expecting such a feeling from inside this jail cell where I've sat minute after day after month, sitting, waiting for a sign, waiting for a hope. A feather falls, and I guess it's fitting that something so simple would help me to cope. Coping's not living, it's just getting by. But it's also getting up out of bed and giving this life the best you can try. I can't get that image out of my head. How did a feather get into this place? And the smile it put upon my face.
This is for Hal Cobb, from Hal Cobb, Honorable Mention Poetry 2010. It's a salsa meditation. My hands will smell for days of onions, garlic, and jalapenos, despite repeated washings after slicing, dicing, and mincing with my trusty little matic and plastic picnic knife, essential utensils of a prison prep chef in a concrete and steel kitchen. I love the feel of a ripe tomato, a ripe, juicy tomato, the fresh earthiness of chopped green pepper, the abundant aromas attack my olfactory senses, tempting and teasing my palate with anticipatory explosion of first taste. And in that moment, I am awakened, enlivened, emboldened, transported from bland grayness of confinement to full sensory recall of my essential humanity.
This is for Thomas Berkelbaugh, third prize poetry, 1987. The short on Q, as in cucumber, range. The Q range officer called down to the cell block desk sergeant. There's a short on Q range. Electricity out, not even lights. Inmates refuse to lock up. Several more requests by the range officer asking for Sergeant Smith what was to be done. Passage of 7 minutes more. Desk Sergeant Smith called his response back up to Q range on a bullhorn. All residents of Q, as in cucumber range, lock up immediately. I have checked the warden's list of authorized items. A short is not on that list. Therefore, I can only conclude that a short must be a contraband item. Whomever has the short, surrender to the Q, as in cucumber, range officer. If found with a short in your possession, you will be disciplined to the max. Don't stand there staring down at me. Lock up now. The inmates on Q range stared blankly at the surroundings and at each other. Dealing with the mentality of Sergeant Smith was a losing proposition at best. They all proceeded to lock up in the dark, mumbling to themselves. Sergeant Smith turned to a guard standing by his desk and asked, in all sincerity, "Didn't we have a similar contraband short problem on F as in Philadelphia range about a year ago?"
Distractions like homemade alcohol, drugs, TV sets, and even excessive sleep may offer you some temporary relief, quick fixes that distract you from the conditions of your new home. But as the seasons start to fade away, your heart and your mind grow a little numb from the fact that no matter what you do, you will still be confined for a fixed period. It even occurs to you that the exactness of your out date seems somewhat irrational in its exactitude. When every day is essentially the same, what makes one day or 1 year any different from another? Something else that doesn't make much sense is the fact that all of the people you imagined being there for you when you get out don't even send you letters anymore, asking you about how you're doing. And it slowly dawns on you that people really are moving on in their lives without you.
Hey guys, we're going to be reading from a long piece of memoir, me and Talib. So this is for Arthur Longworth, First Place Memoir, 2010, Walla Walla IMU. The bread is moving, a small piece broken off of what was pushed through the narrow cuff port to me earlier that morning. A horde of tiny ants have surrounded it, are beneath it, hefting it up on little ant shoulders as they struggle to carry it back to where they live, a crack on the concrete floor a short distance away. Their task appears impossible, but the bread, I know, will soon make it to the crack. It always does. Why do I do this? I continue watching the ants, looking down at them from where I sit cross-legged on the cell floor in stinking orange coveralls. Because they're living beings? In some way like me? I'm still alive, aren't I? It's hard for me to be certain of anything in this place anymore. I haven't spoken in months. What do I actually have to verify that I am still alive? Focus. I redirect my mind, aware that it is necessary to keep it on a short leash here, to rein it in when I feel it slipping, or run the risk of it leaving altogether. Strange things happen to minds in this place. Weak minds break quickly, strong ones later on. I return my attention to the ants, and I realize that I know why it is I do this for them. Because they provide for me a sense that I matter. Yes, that I am in fact still alive.
Padding barefoot back and forth on the cold concrete floor, I stop for a moment to itch. My legs are on fire, my arms, my chest, and scalp. It's because of the bugs, ones that I can barely see, am only able to make out when examining myself closely, lots of them running everywhere. If not for the itch, they might remain unnoticed, that and the small red bumps. But I know there isn't anything I can do, so I don't dwell on it. Itch and move on. Hearing the electronic clack of the heavy steel gate outside of my cell, I go immediately to the door and look out through its narrow slat of unbreakable glass. It's what I do anytime I hear this sound that my ears have become tuned for because it precedes anything that happens here. I see the squad out there in full force in front of the control center, which is all that is visible to me, all that is visible from any cell in IMU. They are bringing someone in. A minute later, he appears, surrounded by guards as he shuffles around the corner. 2 guards have hold of him directly, gripping him tightly by the shoulder and elbow, apparently feeling it is necessary despite the network of chains restraining him, the leash he is connected to, the white cloth sack pulled over his head. As he is pushed forward, it takes me only a second to recognize him. Even with the bag over his head, it would be impossible to mistake Donald Stook for anyone other than who he is. Angry red slashes cover his forearms, dozens of them, maybe more than 100. Vestiges of the times that he's tried to kill himself. And beneath the orange coveralls, I know there are more scars, burn scars. His legs are covered with them from the times he hasn't had anything to cut himself with, when he's wrapped his legs in toilet paper instead and lit it on fire. I remain at the door watching as the guards leave. One of them carrying the orange coveralls that Stook had been wearing. The bag that was over his head is carried by another who also has the chains and a leash. Now that they are gone, I listen. Stook is ranting, an angry, nonsensical tirade that I can hear through the otherwise impenetrable wall. There is no way for me to talk to him when he is like this, I already know. Besides, I'm not sure my voice would work, even if I were to try. I start scratching again.
Uncover that window. Hearing the words used so close and so loud, I push myself up from the floor. Going to the cell door, I look out. Come on, you crazy bastard. It is a guard in front of Stook's cell. I watch as he raises the heavy rubber mallet he has brought with him, bringing it down on the cell floor, banging out another series of loud raps. Uncover the window. It's been nearly 24 hours since Stook was brought in, and they've been giving him the treatment ever since. Coming to his cell door every half hour and banging on it with rubber mallets, trying to rile him verbally, ridiculing him, making certain that he isn't able to sleep. And Stook, the last few times, begging them for water. They haven't turned it on for him since he's been here. Each time he asks, they only laugh at him. Stook, I know, is doing exactly what it is they want him to do. You cannot cover the glass slat in your room here. Doing it is interpreted as a direct expression of defiance, and it is not tolerated. You will be beaten for it. Crazy fuck, the guard says. You're going to get what you're asking for. I promise you that. Watching him closely, I note that his eyes have changed. They seem venomous, hate-filled. Reflecting now what I believe is a glimpse of his psychosis, guards being as susceptible in their own way to the effects of this environment. Long-term exposure being what creates the real monsters, both guards and prisoner. You hear what I'm telling you? He screams it suddenly, unexpectedly, as loud as he can, lashing out simultaneously at the cell door with his heavy, booted foot. A thought comes to me as I watch him leave the block. Stook is in a strip cell with nothing. What can he possibly have covered his window with?
Between violent, gagging coughs, I press a wet t-shirt over my mouth and nose, trying to fend off the invisible, burning gas. My eyes feel as they've been doused in acid. Face down on the floor, I do what I can do to get away from it, but it's useless. It's everywhere. In the confined space of the cell, there is no escaping it. The grinding sound of the cell door coming open breaks into my consciousness. I go to the door, still pressing the t-shirt against my face, and look out at the narrow slat. A mass of guards are assembled in front of Stook's cell. More than a dozen, all wearing helmets and gas masks. 6 completely suited up in full riot gear. When the cell door clangs fully open, the riot-suited guards rush forward, blue-hued bolts of cracking electricity arching out in front of the shield. Once they are inside the cell, I am no longer able to see them. I fall into a fit of gagging coughs. The sound of what is happening next door comes through the coughing. Riot batons smacking naked flesh. The dull thudding of gloved fists, boots. Stook begins to scream a sound of an animal being savagely beaten. And it continues for some minutes, the screaming and the beating. Now begging, desperate, fevered pleas, unintelligible. The guards drag Stook out of the cell and into the view face down, wrists, ankles, chained behind the small of his back. Less than a dozen feet from me, they drop him. Lifting his head, Stook opens his mouth. One of the guards responds by kicking him 8 or 9 times in quick succession, twice contacting solidly with his head. After his kicks, Stook isn't able to scream anymore or beg. Face flat on the concrete and unmoving, he no longer appears conscious. I notice that he is covered in shit, literally, smeared over every part of him. Real shit, caked into his hair. It is this, I realize, that he must have covered the window of the cell door with. Emerging from the cell again, the guards take hold of Stook's chains and begin to pull him across the floor. I know where they are taking him, to one of the large rooms that have no ceiling. They will lay him out there on the concrete near one of the drains, still in chains, and spray him down with a hose. I know because, like countless others, I've been through it myself. And they'll make him lie there for hours, no doubt. The fact that it is winter will quickly become part of the punishment.
I am waiting at the cell door, watching when Stook is finally brought back into the block. I see that he is shivery. His naked body quakes as he shuffles forward blindly, cloth bag pulled over his head. The guards direct him into the shower at the end of the line of cells. Cuffing his wrists, they secure him in a standing position. There is no way now for him to sit down, nor even lower himself enough to kneel. The time Stook spent chained to the bars spanned 3 different shifts, 16 hours. He was given neither anything to eat or drink during this time. And despite having no respite from the shackles, he was forced to relieve himself where he stood. When guards finally did come to get him, he was no longer conscious, his ranting, crying, whimpering all having long ceased. He hung from the bars by his cuffed wrists. I watched as they once again dragged him out of the block, not speaking, their faces angry, intent. After they left, I remember being struck by something I was already well aware of. It is the fact that what they dragged out of the cell block that day, they in no way regarded as human. And it wasn't only because it was Stook. If it were me, it would be the same. Has been. If it were you, don't fucking kid yourself. There would be no difference either.
Vera Montgomery, 1977 poetry winner. Solidarity with cataracts. At 3:25 yesterday morning, I awakened to the staccato wails of a sister in sky-high pain, and the camp was sister-packed. I screamed, I shouted, I banged, I yelled, I hollered, I cursed, and the sister of yesterday's wails carries surgical scars today. All the while, I wondered, as I screamed, I shouted, I banged, I yelled, I hollered, I cursed, where was solidarity? One afternoon, a sister wept, and I wept inside for the wrecking crew's sisters. I can't erase this scene. A water-soaked mountain of broken, empty toiletries, shredded literature, cut-up garments, and atop the heap are sisters' loved ones, pictures, hate torn to bits. All the while, I stood and wondered, where was solidarity? All camps install a stool pigeon snitch box. The box is never idle, cause Louise stole an extra slice of bread. Jeanette is high. How can Dottie go on a furlough when she has walked on the grass? Ann bought commissary for Rose cause they play chicks. Rita stole a pair of chartreuse state sneakers. Vivian smokes in bed. How can Kasha go home to attend her Dad's funeral while not in good standing? Maria was playing Stink Finger in the movie. And as I robbed the camp keeper's stool pigeon snitch box notes, I wondered, where was solidarity?
Reading for Hal Cobb, First Place Essay 2010. The Pursuit of Character. Quote, the evil men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones, end quote. Anthony and Julius Caesar. Being incarcerated often feels like being interred, dead to the world, dead to members of my family, dead to the church of my youth and former community. I imagine that if I am remembered, it is more likely for the evil that I have done, eclipsing any good that it may have occurred prior to or after all that surrounds my crime. There is nothing inherent in a punitive justice system that requires me to look within myself or take personal responsibility. The ongoing work of Shakespeare Behind Bars facilitates the rare occasion of personal reflection to take responsibility for my personal choices, as well as provide an opportunity to remember and encourage my goodness. It doesn't ignore my shadow self, but holds a mirror up to it, enabling me to embrace what I split from or hidden. The pursuit of character within these confines opens me up to all aspects of myself. Prospero is not finished with me yet, nor I with him. In 2003, it was my blindness, my overwhelming drive for control, my prejudice of those who navigate the world differently from me, and the desire to create a better world for my daughter that were my strongest connections to Prospero. If I took on the role again today, he would be a very different man, as I myself am in a very different place. As I'm encouraged to find a truth in the moment while working with Shakespeare's texts, I see a spiritual dimension and correlation which I can apply to my everyday life. The only path to reconciliation of my past and my future is the present. Quote, but release me from my bands with the help of your two hands, end quote, Prospero. The momentary absolution of audience applause dissipates as they are escorted from the prison visiting room and I am strip searched before returning to the yard of my cell. Quote, as you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free, end quote, Prospero. There is no priest to sacramentally absolve me of sin, remit my punishment, or negotiate recompense and reconciliation. Sadness still stalks me. The joy of connection with company and audience, potent human connection, fades as the reality of distance from those I hurt the most sinks in. A student of the documentary producer responded to a viewing of the film in a way that makes me realize my pursuit of character is hardly over. He said, the happy ending to this movie would be to find the guy that is totally free in his concrete prison.
This is by Charles Culhane, First Prize Poetry, 1987, of Cold Places. I used to keep a list of foreign prisons. Lubyanka in Moscow, Portolova in Spain, California's Terminal Island, exotic names of cold places. I thought one day I'll make a poem listing all the names and conjure from their histories hard memories of humans among stone. I'm older now, the lists grow, the edges of papers curl, turn brown. The names still cry out without voice, without ear to hear them. And I can't remember what it was I was supposed to do, except live nearer the fire.
The small piece of bread sits alone on the concrete floor where it was laid some time before, unmolested, eliciting no corresponding activity from the crack only inches away. I am worried because the cell block was flooded the night before and the crack spent nearly the entire night submerged, the water having receded only several hours earlier. The bread is closer to the crack than I've ever placed it before, and still the ants haven't come for it. The discerning part of me already knows there is no way they could have survived. Yet I continue to sit here, waiting, holding on to this ridiculous hope. What else is there to do? I find myself wanting to cry, to break down and weep. No, that's not it. It's more than that, I realize. I want to die, truly. An ant appears then, unexpectedly, squeezing his way out of the jagged seam and taking off at a run. My spirit soars, and quickly he is followed by others.
Many prisoners spend their time surrounded by an almost palpable atmosphere of indifference. And it does not seem to register with most members of society that concrete, barbed wire, and rigidly determinate sentences do not facilitate change. The reality is that the tiniest cell in the deepest, darkest of prisons is a relatively inconsequential thing to somebody who does not feel like they are part of the world anyway. But the human mind will find a way to adapt, even if it means holding on to some of the habits that contributed to a destructive lifestyle in the first place. And I have seen so many people bounce from one distraction to the next, all in an effort merely to pass the time. And then, when their special day arrives, they are given $10 and simply let go.
Thank you very much to our readers. Please give them all another round of applause. We're now going to go on to the second half of the evening, which is going to be really lovely. We are going to have discussion on stage directed by Jackson Taylor, who for about 20 of the 40 years of the prison writing program has been directing the program. And he will be in conversation with Barbara Parsons and Wally Lamb and Wahida Clark. So please welcome Jackson Taylor. Thank you.
I want to thank our chair, Claudia Menza, and I want to thank our amazing committee who does so much work. There we go, we're getting there. There's so many manuscripts to read every year, and there's so many voices. Come on up, and I'll move over one. There's so many voices to choose from, and you have to try to pick winners. And I think the important thing about this is that if we didn't do this reading, and we didn't have these amazing people coming to do this, you would not hear from these people in our society. They would be very forgotten. And I think that's pretty amazing that we get to talk to them and hear from them. I want to say one more thing. A member of our committee, Susan Rosenberg, has a memoir coming out in the spring. And just remember her name, Susan Rosenberg. And I've seen the pages. They're just, if you want to know what it's like to be in an American prison in this period of time, read this book. And Susan Rosenberg, don't miss it. She was a contest winner for the Penn Prison Program many times. So anyway, I've done my plug, and I wanted to do that. Nobody asked me to do that. I just felt like it was necessary. I want to talk to our panelists tonight about writing programs in prisons. Wally, you teach in a prison. Barbara was a student in Wally's class. And Wally had an extraordinary group of writers. He published an anthology through your publisher, HarperCollins, right? And the anthology was about to come out, and you were still inside then, right? And you got a notice from the state of Connecticut that you owed, how much was it?
$352,000 for costs of incarceration.
And if any of you have ever been in a literary memoir anthology, you know you make a lot of money for that. So, but she was getting charged for some sort of strange interpretation of possibly the Son of Sam law, but it's not really clear. So Penn got involved with the case, and Wally nominated Barbara the following year for the Newman Zone Award, which she won, and that changed everything. 60 Minutes got involved, and the next thing you know, the state had reversed its decision. But that took some doing. I'm shortening it quite a bit. But why don't you take the mic for me, Barbara, and maybe just talk a little bit about what it was like to go into a writing workshop for the first time.
Let's see. Wally had been coming to York for about a year before I entered the writing group. I had obligations of tutoring algebra that I couldn't get out of. And so I joined the literacy volunteer group and wrote a story called Dream Cottage. And it was a fantasy about how I would like my life when I was released from prison. And my teacher was so impressed by it that she took it to Dale Griffith, who was our liaison for the writing group with Wally. And so I had to, several of the teachers said they would sponsor or approve for me to join the writing group, and I could get out of tutoring algebra. So I had to write a little 200-word essay about why I wanted to write. And so I submitted that and then joined the writing group. I joined it mainly for therapy because one of my goals when I went to prison was to figure out how I got there. I was not your average criminal and had never committed any other crimes, and then I ended up committing a serious crime. And so I wanted to know what sent me over the edge and what broke me, and I decided I would use my sentence as a time to study myself and where I had lost myself. And so I was going to one-on-one therapy for survivors of abuse, and used my writing and Wally's writing group as a step in helping my, my recovery through survivors of abuse with my therapist. And I would go deeper into what sent me to prison and how I really had lost myself. I had become a mother and an employee and a wife, and a little piece of me belonged to everybody else except myself. So I was on a journey to recover, and the writing group was perfect because when I first started it, that was our main, seemed to be our main goal, was reaching into ourselves and finding out where we went wrong or the mistakes that we made or how we could help ourselves or help others.
Great. Wally, talk about your involvement with the writing workshop. How did you start doing it, and you're still doing it now, still every other Monday, is it?
Thursday.
Thursday, okay.
Yeah, I had no intention of doing this. I started my work at York primarily because I'm kind of a wimp, and I have trouble saying no to good causes. Right, and so I even have in my office a little index card that sort of is my script when people call up, but I couldn't find my index card that day, and it was the librarian at York Prison calling up and saying, and she said, you know, we're in trouble down here. The new governor, this was Governor John Rowland, who later went to prison himself. She said, you know, his policy is to tighten the screws, and he had gotten elected on a campaign promise that once he was governor, these prisoners were going to know that they weren't living at Club Med, and so it got tough. It got a lot tougher. The guards were paramilitarized. Suddenly they had dogs and nightsticks that they were scaring the women with. One of the things I learned when I started working with the women is that the majority of them suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of them from childhood, a lot of them from abusive relationships and so forth. And then suddenly here are these male guards with attack dogs going around and screaming and yelling and making them, fall to the floor and so forth. So what the librarian said was that 2 women had committed suicide and several more had attempted. Would I come and talk about writing? Well, they were just trying to distract the women. I had just recently had the good fortune of having a couple of books selected for the Oprah Book Club. So I went down and for what I thought was going to be this one time, and I talked about writing. We did a couple of exercises, and I asked if anybody had any questions about writing, and hands went up. This was the type of question: "You met Oprah?" Oprah's cool, you know what I'm saying? But there was one woman who on that first visit, she sort of scowled, through the whole program. She was kind of tough looking, and I could see her eyes following me, thinking to herself. I imagined, what the hell is this guy doing here? What's his game? What does he want? So I was very surprised when at the end of the period, I was packing up my stuff thinking that was it for my York prison experience. And she said, "Thanks for coming." And I said, "Oh, you're welcome." And she said, "Are you coming back?" And again, wimpiness won out. And that was 11 years ago. I'm still there. Now, Barbara, as she mentioned, I think she came in after we had been working together for about a year. And she was a really interesting story. Hers was a very interesting story, very sad story. A lot of tragedy in her life from childhood on. And I remember, Barbara, when you entered the classroom, you were very hangdog. You had trouble with eye contact, and you just looked defeated by life. And yet she would write these really beautiful pieces. I wasn't too thrilled with that. What was it, Dream Cottage? Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to cure her of this corny writing, But anyway, she's a very brave woman, and she started taking on the really tough stuff of her life. A mother's mental illness and having been an incest victim when she was a very young child, and on and on and on. When Barbara brought a piece in, which was just about every time we met, she was definitely the good doobie student in this group. She could never at first read it. She would hand it to me or somebody else, and we would read her work aloud, and somebody always knew to pass the Kleenex box, or if there was no Kleenex on the teacher's desk, this big giant roll of toilet paper, that got passed around. And Barbara would sit there and listen to her writing and cry. And one day, I'll never forget this, I turned to you and I said, "Boy, you must cry a river when you're writing and remembering about all this stuff." Do you remember what you said? Yeah. Yeah, she said, I don't cry when I'm writing it, I don't feel it. It's only when I hear it that it comes back to me. I'm not sure what the psychology is behind that, but I thought it was really fascinating. Anyway, I've been a teacher all my adult life, but I have never had the opportunity before I went to York Prison to work with people over a number of years rather than just a semester or a single academic year. And so it was really exciting for me to see Barbara develop as a writer, as a critic of the other writers, and also, I dare say, she began to evolve as a person. Her self-confidence returned, and by the end of her prison stay, she was definitely one of the leaders of the group. She leads in a very quiet way, one of the best teachers that the group had, and she could read her stuff herself.
And I'm sure that prison is not Club Med, and yet at the same time, you have a writing workshop at that prison, and there are many prisons that don't have that, and I think it's important to note that. And also, you could at least use a pen and knew how to put a sentence together. Many people who are incarcerated can't do that. Remedial assistance is so essential to be taught. Now, Wahida, you were in Kentucky, right? And let me give you the mic. Why don't you tell us about your experience with the writing class?
Yes, I was in a federal, my name is Wahida Clark. I was in a federal penitentiary in Kentucky. I served 9.5 years. My prison job was in the law library, and also, like Barbara, I tutored computer classes. And one day I called home to my family. I said, send me some money. They said, Wahida, we'll see what we can do. The money is gone. So I'm like, what? And in prison, it costs money. You have to buy your soap powder, you have to pay to wash your clothes, you have to buy your hair products, blah, 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 blah. Then I had 2 teenage daughters that I left at home, and I was only locked up for like over a year. And my husband, he was also incarcerated. So I got off the phone, went back to the law library, and I'm just sitting there. And I said I have to do something. Number 1, to do my time. Number 2, to set up some kind of foundation for now and when I went home, because again, I had my 2 teenage daughters out there. And the next morning, I went to work, and I'm thumbing through a magazine, and it had a little article in there about a guy who was incarcerated, and he wrote a book. So I'm sitting in the chair, and I'm in the library. I'm the only one in there. I'm looking at all the books on the bookshelves. Then I start visualizing my name on the spine, Wahida Clark. And I said, okay. That's what was my light bulb moment. I said, I'm going to write a book. Never wrote before, never took a writing course. So it's fascinating how when you put something out in the universe, the forces just start working for you. Shortly after that, I said, okay, I'm going to write a book. I didn't know what to do. There was a young lady who came in as an inmate, and her profession on the streets was a literary agent. So she went to the camp administrator and said, could she give a creative writing class? So the administrator said yes. So next thing you know, I see this paper up on the wall saying, sign up for creative writing classes, 10 slots or whatever. So of course, I signed my name up, and to make a long story short, I took the course, started writing, and now I just finished my 9th book.
And you've got sort of a publishing empire, right? You've got your own company.
How can I
right?
forget that?
May I say what you're known as? You're the queen of thug fiction?
Thug love fiction.
Thugs fiction. There you go.
I had to give Wally that book because that piece that I read by Chastity, that was good. And he so happened that's his student. So I said, oh, you got to give it this book because I really enjoyed reading both of those pieces that I did tonight. But what was I saying, y'all?
You were talking about your company. You
Okay,
have a
right.
company.
So while I was in prison, I got published while in prison, and it's ironic. When my first book came out, that book that Wally is holding, it had a different cover. But one day the prison lieutenant came to get me, took me to the lieutenant's office and asked me, had a book. One of my books, he said, what is this? So I said, what do you mean, what is this? He said, how did this happen? I said, you guys gave a creative writing course on how to get published.
Was the course transformative for you in a way other than just making a book?
It was short, it was brief, I got my certificate, and I moved on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
After he asked me, what was this? How did this get done? They sent me back, then they called me back 7 o'clock the next morning. They said, Ms. Clark, we're going to have to put you in a hole while we investigate how you did this right here. So they put me in a hole for 8 months while they investigated how I was able to get a book published from a course that they gave on how to get published and write. So they kicked me out of Lexington and sent me to Alderson, West Virginia with Martha Stewart. But while I was in the hole, I ended up writing another book. I met Martha Stewart. I wrote more books. I just kept at it. But I'm humbled to be here, and while I was in prison, I said that to say this, that as soon as my book started floating around, the prison system, state, federal, other inmates started sending me manuscripts. They said, Wahida, how did you do that? I'm locked up, I write, how can I get on like you? So I started reading, and I said, okay, I'm going to be a literary agent. I'm going to start my own publishing company, all behind the prison walls. Next thing you know, I get called in August, and I get called down to the lieutenant's office again because I was getting all this fan mail and manuscripts, and they said, you're running a business here, Miss Clark. You're out of here. I got in trouble again. But now that I'm home, I have my own publishing company, Wahida Clark Presents Publishing. I have about 14 authors. All of them are incarcerated except for maybe 2. And that's what I do, y'all.
Yeah. Barbara, Wally's told your story of the class. Let's hear it from your side of it. What was it like to go in there? What did you do? What did you feel happened to you as a result of that?
In Wally's writing class?
Yeah, or just in writing in general.
Writing in general, well, I like to write so that people can visualize what I'm writing. I have like a good memory where I can picture where things were in a room 10 years ago or whatever. So I write very descriptive, or I try to. We don't always see eye to eye, but especially in chronological order, you know. And that's another thing, I write in chronological order. One of our assignments was to put together, or maybe it wasn't an assignment, I did it on my own, but I think it was an assignment, to put together a memory of every single year of your life, you know. So I did that, and it's amazing how one memory triggers another memory. I also found that in the beginning I wasn't feeling anything that I wrote. I wrote and had no emotion at all because I was so walled up and afraid, because in prison you have to watch every reaction that you make for anything. You know, I mean, you can get in trouble for anything, so you are like a robot. You just don't dare react. One time my daughter and grandkids were coming from Georgia, and they made me sit and wait an hour and a half while she was in the visiting room, wait to take me over to see them. And I just sat and watched the clock and tried not to react, and really survived in prison by living 5 minutes at a time. I never went past 5 minutes, because if you do, then something happens to disappoint you, and then that affects your emotions. So you really have to learn survival skills, or, you know, for yourself, and that's how I survived. I just was very regimented with anything that I wanted badly. I would just learn to control myself. And you never let DOC know that you have a good roommate, because if they know you're comfortable, that roommate is moved out. So you just learn to really watch your feelings and emotions. And eventually I was able to feel things, mainly reading some of the other girls' writings. And then we did a lot of critiquing. And Wally had taught us, you know, how to critique without hurting people's feelings, you know, and if you wanted to know more of what the uncle was doing, you know, how to tell the other writer what she needed to add to her paper to explain things a little better. So it was all a learning.
How did you feel when you got the letter saying that you were now being charged for your incarceration because you had published this essay? What was that like?
Well, because I was still in prison, it wasn't funny, but all of the girls in my building, we all got called down to be transported over to visits. And we get down to the door, and we're all people from the writing group, and we go, oh my God, you know, this must have to do with the writing group, maybe because the book is coming out, because we knew the book was coming out, but we never, soon, like within days or weeks. And so we thought it had something to do with something good, something to do with the book. And we get over to visiting, and there's a sheriff there to serve us papers. And then when we looked, we just kind of joked about it until we looked at the papers and saw the amount of money they were suing us for. Bonnie's was almost $1 million. It was 900 and some thousand.
917,000, yeah.
17,000. Mine was 352,000, and all of a sudden it wasn't a joke. It was serious, and we were devastated. And the whole pleasure or joy of putting out the book was gone.
And they also sued HarperCollins, right? Is that right? Well,
No. No, I was not being sued. HarperCollins was not being sued, but Wahida, you were mentioning that you were investigated. I was also investigated, and I saw an internal memo where somebody in the Department of Correction had written, these women can't possibly have written this. He's writing it and passing it off as theirs, which sort of gives you an idea of, what their attitude is toward the people in their custody. It was maddening to me. I communicated every step. Here's the way the book came about, and there are 2 books now. But I was just there to sort of, help the women, as Barbara said, kind of like figure out how and why they had gotten to this place. But they became such good critics of one another, and they revised so relentlessly, and they were so hungry. They were like sponges wanting to know what they could learn about writing, that their work became publishable. It came about accidentally. I was in New York on my own book business, and my editor said, "So, what's new with you?" I said, "Hey, I'm really excited about this group that I'm working with." And she said, just to be polite, I think, she said, "Oh, well, you'll have to send me some of their stuff someday." Well, I was coming on the train from New Haven, and I just happened to be working on the women's stuff. So I pulled somebody's out of my briefcase, and I said, I'll read it to you right now. And when I was finished, this is sort of a hard-boiled New York editor who's not a crier, and all of a sudden I looked up when I finished what I had read, and she had tears coming down her eyes, and she said, this is better than like 75% of the stuff that I consider for publishing. So that was how the book came about, or the possibility of a book. I went immediately to the Department of Correction. I let them know what was happening. I said, "Gee, could you please, tell me? I'll give you the manuscript. Tell me what you're comfortable with, what you're not, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about this in any way." They wouldn't. I handed in the manuscript. They wouldn't meet with me. They wouldn't meet with HarperCollins lawyers. And in my naivety, I thought that silence meant consent, and I thought that all the way up to the week before publication, when a woman named Robin Cullen, who had done her time and was already out, called me up and to say that the sheriff had just come to her door, and she was being billed for the cost of her imprisonment, like she had been staying at the Holiday Inn or something, $117 per day times the number of days of her sentence. And that's how they arrived at all these, outrageous numbers. I realized that what they were trying to do was silence the women. And there is also a culture of fear in the Department of Correction. What they're scared of more than anything else is public backlash, public reaction. And I think it had to do with the fact that, I had those books in the Oprah Book Club, and I think they were afraid that this was going to become a bestseller, and then it was going to come back at them, that these women are supposed to be, they're in there to be punished. Why, how is it that they're writing, this book?
Well, it's that same attitude. We used to have something in this country called the Pell Grant, which a prisoner could apply to and get an education. And then mainly because of pressure within the people who worked in the prison industry, who were very jealous that somebody was serving a sentence and getting a college degree while they're walking around with a gun and guarding and working very hard, no doubt. And I've just come to believe, and I wanted to leave with some ideas in people's heads about things that maybe could change, but why isn't there like a GI Bill for, rather than take away the right for the prisoner to try to get an education, which we know prevents crime and reduces recidivism, why aren't we also educating the people who work in the industry? Have a GI Bill for them like we do for a soldier. It's a really a hardship job. And then, you know, there wouldn't be that jealousy. Maybe there would even be some incentive to help each other move ahead. Now, Barbara said something about she had a coping mechanism of 5 minutes, and she would use that to get through the day. Did you have coping mechanisms, Wahida?
I, like Barbara, she said she took 5 minutes at a time. I just took one day at a time. And my husband, who was also incarcerated, he's a master jailer. He said, Wahida, just don't waste time, just stay busy. So that was my coping mechanism, just stay busy. My same regimen every morning, get up 5 o'clock, pray, go run, do my little job, and write. In the evening, if it was basketball season, I would catch a basketball game. I was in the woods in West Virginia. There wasn't a decent radio station, so sometimes they would put BET on. I get a chance to hear some music, and that was it. That's how I did my time, my whole 9.5 years.
Did you have other things that you did?
Yes, when I first got to prison, I worked in food prep for 27 months, and food prep prepared the food for all the male prisons in Connecticut. So we cooked for like 18,000 every day. It was
It's a big industry.
It was very big. The pots we cooked in were gigantic. You had to go up on a ladder to get inside them to clean them. They're so big. I ended up going from washing pots to making the awful food that they feed us to being a baker to a butcher. And then as I was there more, longer, we had a dining room called shared dining room for the school and Datacom, some of the workers. And so they put me with a supervisor in charge of preparing the food for shared dining. So by myself, I prepared food for about 100, 150 every day, Monday through Friday. But I earned that just because I had been there a long time and proven good behavior and all that. One of the things that I used to get irate about was we always had people coming in and out of food prep because nobody really wanted to do the cafeteria or food jobs. And when somebody stole something, we would all be punished. So no matter how long I had been there, if somebody stole something, usually it was something sweet from the bakery, we would all get punished. And I got so mad one day, I walked out, and I don't know how I didn't end up in segregation, but they smoothed it over and got me back and gave me a lecture and told me I couldn't do that anymore, But they knew what a hard worker I was, and they were depending on me. I was making their job easier. And so for me to get out of food prep, I had to leave work one day and go to the captain of my building, which isn't an easy feat, and ask for a classification change immediately so that they wouldn't send me back to food prep because they wouldn't let me go. And I didn't want to spend all my time working in food prep. I wanted to try and finish my education because with Roland, they were taking away all the programs. And we were losing, I lost my survivor of abuse, I lost my one-on-one counseling, I was losing all the programs, and they were talking about losing, getting rid of the college programs, which were hard enough to get into. So my captain did sign the papers, and I got permission to go directly to the school principal, and I asked her about the education, the college, if they had like mail order courses or something I could do, because my concentration was really bad from the post-traumatic stress. So I was concerned about even being able to retain anything. And she talked me into trying one class, sitting in a classroom and doing one class and seeing if I could retain, any of the information instead of doing the mail order, which they don't do anymore. I think it was the University of Ohio worked with the prisons, but I'm not sure. I think they did away with that while I was still at York. So anyway, I took the one class, which was juvenile delinquency, and my teacher worked with me, helping me to study again. Instead of me cramming, I had to study like in 20 minutes, 20-minute increments, so I would remember what I had read, and eventually my grades started going up, and I ended up getting my associate's degree with honors. And I had half my credits before I got there, but I finished it while I was there. And I think I was the only one because they started doing away with the programs.
Thank you. Yep.
Before we get off the subject of food and food prep, I have gotten, way more of an education than I've given to the women down at York. And one of the things that they've taught me, and you probably remember the piece that was read before about the power of cigarettes in a men's prison. One of the things that the women have taught me is how powerful junk food is in prison. You don't have regular money, and everybody wears the same thing. There's no jewelry worn, and so the currency becomes honey buns and what, Skittles and all that crap.
Skittles, coffee's a big one, creamer, sugar.
Yeah.
Any of your commissary. We call them. Some people buy commissary to win all kinds of favors. We call them commissary hoes, but but you just. I made one friend who was always in and out of segregation because she would somehow get makeup into the prison. I never asked her how, but she couldn't live without makeup. So when she would come out of segregation, I would hand her a honey bun or, because she also was a drug addict, so she liked her sweets. So I would give her something like that or a pound cake or whatever. And when she came home, because usually, people with nonviolent crimes do a lot less time. So when she went home and knew that I was coming home, she had a job ready for me if I wanted it with her brother's business. And just because I was kind to her, I didn't ask for anything back, but just taking her under my wing, because I used to get a kick out of all that makeup.
But all the junk food, of course, leads to obesity and diabetes and all these other problems, and so,
Yes.
it's dangerous. Yeah.
And then we were eating the same food they make for the men who have a higher calorie count, and they used to put these little pellets in them, which I can't remember what they're called, like protein pellets, but they turn to little pieces of like fat. They're disgusting.
We're going to have to stop there. I hope if we've done anything, we've just given you a little glimpse into what the world inside of a prison might be like. It is an industry. It makes a lot of money. If it was a normal industry, it would have shareholders, and it would have all sorts of accountability factors built into it. They are funded by us, the taxpayers, and they do not want you to see what we've just heard today. They being the big they of them, who are probably just like us, only they got in the wrong job somewhere along the line. But what can we do? That's the question I want to leave with you. What can we do to find out what goes in there? How do we get visiting rights? How do we make things easier to access? If we leave with nothing else tonight, ask yourselves that. What is it that I could do to change this system? Thank our guests, Wally Lamb, Barbara Parsons, Wahida Clark. Thank La Poisson Rouge. Thank Elizabeth Weinstein for her tireless efforts. Good night, everyone. Thank you.